Recovering land after wildfires is no easy task, especially when it comes to nature. You can rebuild a house in a relatively short time, but restoring burned ecosystems is incredibly tough. Different methods are used, like mulching with straw or other materials. Thousands of seedlings are planted to bring back vegetation. Heavy machinery is brought in to help restore the landscape. After a fire, it turns into something that quickly falls apart with all the consequences that follow. But in California, they do things differently. In 2023, after yet another massive wildfire that burned hundreds of thousands of acres of forest, local ecologists decided to follow the motto, "Leave it to the Beavers," and released a group of rodents onto the fire-scorched land. How does this even help? That's what we're going to figure out today. These days, plenty of Californians would tell you our state and fires go hand in hand, and they're not wrong. Just look at the climate. Some call it a once-in-a-century megadrought. Others argue it's just the latest round of the area's usual dry phase. But the most important thing is that temperatures are getting higher and the number of dry months is increasing. As a result, the fire season now lasts an average of 105 days longer and covers 6 times more land in the state than it did just a couple of decades ago. And it's not just about the climate and its changes. Decades of suppressing wildfires, which are normal for California's landscape, haven't done much good. And some experts say they've actually made things worse. Fuel like dry branches and everything else keeps piling up, making the scale of fires even bigger. Another problem is human infrastructure. Accidents on power poles and transmission lines, which often run right through forests or other areas full of flammable fuel, have caused 3,600 wildfires in the state since 1992. What does all this lead to? A grim statistic. According to the National Interagency Fire Center, in 2023 alone, California had 7,364 wildfires. This is more than any other U.S. state. At the same time, over the past few decades, the total burned area has grown significantly. The average annual burned area from 2010 to 2019 was around 770,000 acres, but from 2020 to 2023, that number jumped to 1.9 million acres. Yes, of course, the first to suffer from wildfires are people. Take, for example, the recent fire that hit Los Angeles. A total of 18,189 structures were destroyed, and economic losses ranged from 28 to 57 billion US dollars, which includes both direct property damage and indirect economic fallout. For example, job losses and business disruptions, a horrific event that left a permanent mark. But if you look at the bigger picture, California's wildfires don't just harm people, they also devastate nature. For example, the Dixie Fire, which raged from July to October 2021 in Northern California, burned nearly 988,000 acres, making it the second largest wildfire in the state's history. The flames tore through old-growth conifer forests, including ponderosa pine, silver fir, and Douglas fir. In areas with especially intense heat, even fire-resistant trees were killed, leaving behind nothing but charred trunks and scorched earth. The rivers and streams took a major hit from the wildfires. After heavy rains, tons of ash, soot, and charred debris washed into the water. A sudden spike in turbidity and a drop in oxygen levels were recorded in the waters, which is bad news for salmon and trout populations. Ash and soot clogged spawning grounds and harmed aquatic invertebrates, key links in the food chain. The ecosystems affected by the Dixie Fire were severely disrupted. Specifically, the destruction of vegetation-altered soil structure, its chemical composition, and microbial activity. The loss of forests led to changes in microclimate, increased temperature swings, and reduced humidity. Disrupted food chains and broken connections between species have slowed down natural recovery. For some endemic plants and animals that were completely wiped out in the burned areas, this is an irreversible loss of biodiversity and unique ecosystems. And you know what the worst part is? While buildings can be rebuilt quickly, nature doesn't work that way. Its recovery is a long process. However, Californians have managed to find a natural booster to help nature return scorched areas to their original state. These are nature's engineers, capable of restoring what fires destroy without billion-dollar investments or years of effort. We're talking, of course, about beavers. Plumas County, the Tasman-Koyam Valley, the ancestral land of the Maidu people, and one of the places nearly wiped out by the Dixie Fire. In 2023, 2 years after the fire, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, or CDFW, together with tribal members, released a family of 7 beavers. By the way, this was the first release of its kind in almost 75 years. Next, the researchers observed what the new local residents, once actively hunted in these areas, were up to. And you know what? Calling beavers ecosystem engineers, ecologists, and others aren't wrong at all. Even in severely degraded landscapes, these creatures found materials to build dams. On top of that, the rodents constructed lodges and dug numerous canals. Basically, for them, the land wasn't something to restore, just home. It's been about a year and a half since the ecosystem engineers graduated. Turns out the settlers have been working on large-scale dam projects all over their landing zone. One of them is almost 330 feet wide, the biggest in the valley. Can you imagine how much time and effort those rodents had to put into this thing? Meanwhile, the beavers began expanding the dam equivalent, a man-made structure imitating nature's handiwork. It was installed before the rodents arrived, and as it turned out, for good reason. The CDFW director said that beavers are nature's Swiss Army knife, but we'd say they're more like wizards. I mean, what else would you call them after what they've done to the valley? Since the water has slowed down significantly due to the dams, ponds have appeared on once scorched land, meaning the area of standing water has grown much larger, and standing water is precisely the key to boosting biodiversity. Plants need water that doesn't rush away in a fast current but instead nourishes the soil, which eventually leads to moisture-loving plants sprouting up along the pond banks and in the water itself. We're talking about wetlands, because that's exactly how they form when beavers get to work. You might think there's nothing complicated about creating ponds through human effort. However, studies have compared two types of water bodies, those made by beavers and those formed in other ways. The rodents' work actually hosts 33% more plant species. Might not sound like a big deal, but for California recovering from wildfires, it really matters. And yeah, let's not forget that rodents have more than just dams in their arsenal. They dig tons of channels, letting water spread farther than the ponds formed by mud walls across the stream. According to CDFW research, the total water surface area in the release zone increased by about 23%. Plants don't just need water, they also need various elements that might have been stripped from local ecosystems due to fires and post-fire erosion. Well, studies show that beaver dams are such effective sediment traps that they're hard to beat. Imagine there's 100 tons of sediment just flowing down the stream somewhere. Thanks to beaver structures, all of it can get trapped, and we're not talking about the 330-foot dam built by beavers in Plymouth. As they say, such gigantic construction marvels can hold around 500 tons of sediment, which works out to roughly 154 pounds per 10 square feet. Sure, sediment doesn't always contain anything useful, but there can be a decent amount of, say, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, stuff that makes plants grow like crazy. Plants plus standing water are a magnet for invertebrates. Some love to breed in standing water, others hunt those who breed and what comes from that breeding. Basically, insect life thrives in wetlands. The only downside is that the local people might not be thrilled because, well, dragonflies buzz loudly and mosquitoes bite. But you can live with it somehow. Fish also move into the ecosystem created by beavers. Why not if these new habitats are just perfect for some aquatic species? For example, fish that often live in streams with variable currents can thrive in these calm, plant-rich areas for spawning. However, we think many are waiting to hear about how beaver construction interacts with a fish that has a tough fate, salmon. Let's start by saying beavers and salmon evolved together for millions of years without a problem until humans came along. So us bipedal folks shouldn't stress over salmon getting past a dam. They've got worse trouble with humans. A full-grown salmon can straight up leap over a dam. Yes, these fish are great jumpers. Yeah, a super tall beaver wall might be a challenge, but a mature salmon can deal with that too, just differently. For young salmon, it's a completely different scenario. Since they thrive in beaver ponds, which serve as key habitats, everything they need is there. Cold water, shielded by dense vegetation, and loads of food, including insects from around the ponds. Beavers also dig channels or create water networks through ponds, giving salmon a way to move around. This is really helpful because between humans and other issues, salmon often struggle to complete their life cycle. Finally, beaver ponds attract birds and mammals thanks to their rich food sources and shelter. Studies show that up to 50 bird species have been recorded in these ecosystems, including nightingales, herons, and ducks, as well as otters and muskrats, which use the dams and lodges for protection and foraging. In the end, beaver structures can transform the damaged landscape of California's Plymouth County into a complex mosaic ecosystem. By raising water levels, filtering sediment, boosting wetland plant growth, and attracting species from different trophic levels, the dams create resilient pond networks. These green oases become drivers of biodiversity recovery, speeding up regeneration and reducing reliance on costly human interventions. No, it's not some miracle solution that'll undo all the damage from the Dixie Fire, but let's calculate how much it would cost to fully restore biodiversity in the streams of the Tasman-Cuyum Valley. Clearly a lot. And that's not even counting the fact that beavers are great at restoring streams and rivers after erosion, plus they protect them from further damage. As we've already discussed, dams slow down the flow, which reduces the water's erosive power. For example, one study says the decrease can be as much as 50%. Because of this, sections of the streams are protected from further erosion, which started after the Dixie Fire. Plus, protection happens because plants start growing back along the banks, plants that had been wiped out by the fire. Often it's their roots that keep the banks from collapsing. When it comes to restoring water bodies, sediment plays a huge role. Imagine that everything floating down the river doesn't flow away but gets trapped behind the dam, then slowly settles. This is how restoration of the banks that have suffered from destructive processes works. And what do you think of views like this? Greenery near rivers and streams with scorched lands all around. These are so-called green corridors. And yes, they appear thanks to today's heroes, ecosystem engineers and brilliant builders. Beaver dams create a real line of defense against fire by forming long ponds where standing water keeps the soil and plants moist. When analyzing 5 major wildfires in western states, scientists found that in areas with dams, the greenness index dropped by only 19%, while in dry areas it fell by 58%. This means that where beavers are present, fire doesn't wipe out all the greenery in its path. Another feature of the green corridors is a hydrological safety cushion. Water behind the dam slowly seeps into plant roots, keeping groundwater levels 8 to 12 inches higher than the surrounding area. NASA confirms, even in the hottest season, these areas don't dry out or turn into a matchbox for flames. And here you can imagine how useful this is for the streams in arid California, where scorching heat is the norm, especially lately. Plus, beavers gnaw on trees and shrubs to use them for building their lodges and dams, and even that helps protect against wildfires. For example, there's an area with lots of plants, meaning plenty of fuel for a fire. Then there's another spot with fewer plants, thanks to beavers. In the first case, the fire will easily spread through all the trees and bushes, no problem, especially with wind. After that, it'll reach the river and destroy everything near it. In the second case, the fire has less room to move, so it might stop before even getting to the water. A side effect of beaver activity is creating microzones with cool, moist air above water surfaces. These oases remain untouched, even in extreme temperatures. The air temperature over beaver ponds is recorded at 41 degrees Fahrenheit lower than in the surrounding dry areas. This helps stop the spread of wildfires, and it also saves animals that have encountered the fire and ended up in a tough spot. Yeah, they try to escape, which leads them to these cool, fire-safe places. So beavers aren't just restorers, they're saviors too. Plus, it's a way to cut costs on fire protection. Just a little tip for the authorities. Though to be fair, they've known for a while now the perks of reintroducing animals that were once wiped out in California. For example, you can go to the CDFW website and see that they're hiring staff to help restore beaver populations. And right above that, you'll notice that in 2023, CDFW launched a recovery program aiming to collaborate with pretty much anyone willing to help. And no, this isn't an ad, just proof that officials are seriously invested in beavers now. What about beavers flying on parachutes? No, this isn't a joke, it really happened. Just not in California, but in Idaho. The parachute beaver drop program started in the late 1940s when the state had too many of these animals and leftover World War II parachutes. In 1950, Elmo Heater from Idaho Fish and Game explained how the traditional horse transport method turned out to be exhausting, time-consuming, and expensive, while beaver mortality rates rose due to stress and heat. That's when they decided if there were extra parachutes lying around, why not try dropping beavers from the sky? After a series of tests with dummies, it turned out that 2 individuals could comfortably fit under one parachute. Pairs of beavers were packed into wooden crates with ventilation and dropped from airliners at an altitude of about 246 feet. Out of 76 animals dropped in the fall of 1948, only 1 died. A beaver escaped its crate and jumped straight to the ground when it was just 3 feet from the runway. The most famous parachutist was an old male named Geronimo. He was dropped over and over until he finally calmed down and started seeing the crate as his home. The parachute drop cost the state about $16 per beaver, half what horse transport cost. At the same time, mortality rates dropped and work hours were cut drastically. The savings and efficiency made this method one of the most unusual yet effective conservation approaches of its time. Soon after their arrival, the beavers got straight to work building dams and creating wetlands, which helped restore soil moisture, prevent erosion, and boost aquatic plant growth. These engineering efforts brought the landscape to life, attracting birds and small mammals, while also laying the groundwork for a more comprehensive ecosystem recovery in the region. Though the idea sounds like a scene from an adventure movie, it delivered real results. Beaver colonies settled into new territories, and today, many scientists consider this beaver drop one of the most creative and successful examples of wildlife intervention last century.